The keynote speech. You provided me a great pretext to be able to come here and eat Sally's and Pepe's Pizza, which is the best pizza in America, is right here in New Haven, Connecticut. You know, I was an undergrad here back in the day, and people said, you know, New Haven pizza is so good. And, you know, I was growing up in the Tampa Bay area. For us, pizza was Papa John's and Pizza Hut, right? Like, we didn't know New York City pizza, much less New Haven pizza. And eventually I made my way to Pepe's. And I ate it, and the next day I'm like, you know, that's the best damn pizza I've ever had in my life. And then people would say, well, what, do you like it better than Sally's? And I was like, why would I ever go anywhere else but Pepe's? It's so good. So fast forward today, and I have over the years had Sally's on takeout, but had never actually gone in. So we decided to go in today to have Sally's, and it's a really earth-shattering day for me because Sally's may be my favorite now. I don't know. I think they're both really, really good. So, you know, there's a lot to be said about some of the battles that we face, but, you know, I think about what needs to be done to preserve freedom in Florida and throughout the country. I am reminded of an anecdote from Judge Robert Bork, who was a great professor at Yale Law School, was a fantastic judge, should have been on the U.S. Supreme Court. And he said one way to save America is to simply close Yale Law School. And for what I've seen throughout the recent years, I mean, there may be some to it, but I do commend you for fighting back against a very difficult tide. Because I think the leftism you see at Yale, particularly, I would say in the post-2020, the BLM, everything that happened after that, has been really, really negative in terms of its ferocity, in terms of its really disregard for traditional notions of free speech. And these are people, if you don't toe the line, you know, they want to destroy you. So when you're stepping up in an environment like that and you're willing to speak the truth and you know there may be some cost to that, you should be commended for that. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for fighting the fight on hostile terrain. I'm often asked, like, you know, what are you doing and how do you approach everything? There's a lot of different things. I mean, there's certain things I just got to do to keep my state running. I got to respond to disasters and emergencies, all these things. But in terms of where I want to take us in terms of philosophy and what principles I want to see reflected in the policies that govern my people, the thing that motivates me is, you know, I want to beat the left across the board. I don't want to give them an inch on everything. I have not seen any institution that has succumbed to leftism succeed. In fact, they're corrupted to the core when that happens. So as a leader now, you have to understand it's not just about what government does. That's huge part of it, don't get me wrong. And in Florida, I'm proud to say we have the lowest number of state employees per capita in the United States of America. We have the lowest debt per capita. We have no income tax. Since I've been governor, we've paid off 36% of the state's debt from 1840s to the present. And so we do it right. We limit government, and that's really, really important. But it's not enough, because the left has captured so many institutions in our society that if you say, hey, all I'm going to do is make sure I cut taxes and look after spending and then don't do anything else, the left will win the way things are in American society now. So for example, we've taken on the universities in the state of Florida. If you are somebody that is at a commencement ceremony and you're screaming and yelling and shouting down the speaker, we hold you accountable for that conduct. You have a right to your opinions. You don't have a right to exercise bad behavior. So we have actually withheld people's degrees because they violated code of conduct. And guess what? The minute you start to see consequences, the minute the inmates know they don't run the asylum, they start to behave much better. And that's how it should be in every university around this country. We've also understood, how did the universities get to this place? And a lot of it is because there's this notion that the faculty should control the universities. And so if you put yourself up for tenure, I would imagine if you put yourself up for tenure at Yale Law School and you don't toe the ideological line, you're probably not going to get it, right? I mean, 9 out of 10 times. That doesn't work for us. And so what we did in Florida is we did two main things. One, all tenured professors have to undergo review and they can be let go for poor performance. And so we've been able to filter out unproductive ideological faculty, the media will say, oh, brain drain from Florida, faculty leaving because of this law. And I'm just thinking to myself, wait a minute. If we're losing professors of intersectional Marxism, that's not bad for Florida. That is good for Florida. And so you've seen that. But we've also paired that with an empowerment of our university boards of trustees, which I appoint, and presidents of the university to bring in faculty. And so we give them a lot of money so they can say, hey, you're making $250,000 at MIT, we'll give you $300,000 to come to University of Florida. So we've brought in a lot of faculty who are not infected with this woke mind virus and actually believe in what a university should be. And the traditional mission is pursuing truth, teaching students to be able to think critically and think for themselves, and preparing our students to be citizens of our republic. So recentering higher education is something that's really, really significant. We don't cede higher education to the left in the state of Florida, nor do we cede K through 12 education in the state of Florida. And that doesn't even mean what we're doing in terms of school spending, school choice. And we do have universal school choice in Florida. Every parent can simply choose the school and the money will follow the student. And so we've liberated hundreds of thousands of students from poor choices. And guess what's happened with this? Our school districts perform better than they did prior to there being full-fledged educational choice, because they have to compete for students, they have to modernize their offerings, they have to do things to convince parents that that's where you should send. So we're proud of that. It's important, but we're also very intent on empowering parents to be a part of this beyond just choosing the school. Every parent has a right to know what's being taught in their kid's classroom. It's not acceptable to be teaching fourth graders that they were born in the wrong body or that their gender is a choice. We have fought back against that. We've empowered parents to expose that. And as a result, people's education is much better than if we let things run wild like they do in so many of the other blue areas of the country. Now, this fight over education is not even limited to the policies. We had to have the skirmish with Disney about gender ideology in the schools. And, you think about it, this is a company that caters to kids. Why would you want to be injecting yourself into this? So from a business perspective, I think it was a huge mistake, but I think it was emblematic of what was happening, particularly in 21, 22, 23, where you have this woke mind virus just causing people to lose their wits. And so we had the Parents' Rights Bill that was before the Florida legislature. It was being demagogued by the media and by Disney as well. And they came out and condemned it. They said it shouldn't pass. People said to me, well, Disney's the 800-pound gorilla. No one in Florida has ever gone up against Disney and came out alive on the other side. And I said, well, we'll just see about that, because I will sign the bill for sure. And we did. But the thing that happened was, and so that's one thing, to fight a powerful interest and to do what's right, knowing there could be consequences. But we also looked at, okay, Disney happened to be the recipient of massive and unprecedented subsidies granted by the state, and not necessarily in the form of direct cash subsidies, but in the form of actually allowing Disney to control and operate its very own local government, which I don't think any corporation has done anywhere in the United States, but certainly not in Florida. And so they were able to do things where they had tax breaks, where they were taxing other business. I mean, it was really, really crazy, but because they were so powerful, nobody said anything. And so the question for us is, okay, if we're in this fight, if we believe education is important, if we believe parents' rights is important, are we just going to sit here and let this very powerful company based in Burbank, California, weaponize the subsidies that the state granted many decades ago and turn it against our own state's policy when they say they're going to try to get it overturned in the courts and all that stuff? The answer for me, if you want to beat the left, is no. You can't just sit there and let that happen. And so we looked at it and said, you have this nest egg of special privileges. We're going to put you on equal footing with Universal Studios and SeaWorld and all the other parks. And so there'll be one set of rules in the state of Florida for all these companies. Nobody has a better business environment. Hell, some of them may have gone out of business on their parks if I hadn't made sure they were open during COVID. And so we said, we're doing that. The result was the media is like, oh, you can't do that. You can't take away that. First of all, the media hated those privileges for decades just because I was the one saying to do. Then they did a reversal on it. But they said, you can't do that. Oh, Disney's going to leave and all this stuff. And all. People are actually saying Disney needs to leave Florida. Well, here we are today, years later. Disney is not in Columbus, Ohio. They were still in Central Florida. And they have invested, they've pledged an investment of over $18 billion in the future in the state of Florida. So we did the right thing. We fought on turf that maybe is a little uncomfortable for people who are on the center right, because there is kind of the DNA of, hey, just government, just get out of things, don't do anything. But I think had we not had that fight, I do not think you would have seen the tide of corporate wokeness turn the way it is. Because what these CEOs, especially publicly traded corporations, would say to themselves is, you know, I can't run afoul of the left, because if I run afoul of the left, they're coming after us. But they could always run afoul of the right because no one did a thing to fight back. Well, in Florida, we fought back, we won, and we really helped change the tide all across the country. And the same thing with things like ESG. You have these companies, some of the asset managers, some of these funds, that were saying, okay, we're going to utilize this massive economic power to basically pursue a far left agenda, environment, social governance, very, very left-wing things. And so we're in a situation, do we just let them do that, let them use their power to change society, or do we fight back? And look, these are private companies. Some people would say you can't do anything. That wasn't what we believed in Florida. So we took $2 billion from our pension fund away from BlackRock, who was managing it at the time. I think we were the first state to fight back against the ESG. We also banned any ESG consideration, and our entire pension fund is over $240 billion. And as a result of what we did, and you had Larry Fink saying, oh, ESG's become toxic because guys like DeSantis are always out there railing on it. But the reality is, ESG is dead today because we stood up and fought back against it. And that's what you have to do if you just sit there and don't do anything. So this is a full spectrum fight. You got to fight the left, yes, in the legislative chambers. You got to fight them in the bureaucracy. You got to fight them in the schools and the universities, in the corporate sphere, all across the board. We can't let the woke mind virus win the day in any of these. And we've been very successful in Florida. And yes, that's why they say Florida is the state where woke goes to die, and it is dead. The other thing you have to do to beat the left, you got to be willing to utilize the levers of power that are available to you. And I believe in constitutionally limited government, but there's some people that say anytime you exercise valid constitutional powers, that somehow that means you don't believe in limited government. That's not true at all. Before I took office as governor, I had my folks give me the compendium of all the constitutional, statutory, customary powers that the governor had. I wanted to know every piece of leverage that I had to be able to move things in the direction I was trying to move things. And so these are things that are there. Some of them are uncontested. Some of them I may need the legislature. Some of them I know for sure I'll get sued in the courts, but I have good ground on. And so we do that, and we use the levers that are available to us to be able to move things. So, for example, the Soros prosecutors. You started to see these people get elected, particularly on the heels of the BLM riots, and they were running to not enforce the law. They thought enforcing the law, actually I was talking to one of the students about, they said that if you think someone should go to jail for stealing $1,000 in merchandise, that you're somehow a racist. No, don't steal people's stuff, it's wrong. So when you have that mentality, you are going to get more crime, and that's what you've seen happen. And cities that used to be really, really bustling, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, they have collapsed over the last 3 or 4 years, largely as a result, or in part as a result, of these prosecutors. And so when we started seeing that, I told my folks, I said, we cannot allow this to happen in the state of Florida. And so I said, make sure we're getting reports from law enforcement, any of these people. So we had a guy in Tampa who was funded by Soros and was basically not prosecuting certain crimes. He even said he would refuse to uphold any legislation involving right to life, even protections against late term. He said he wouldn't do. And so we looked at the record, and I said, look, I have the power to suspend these people, and I'm going to do it. So I yanked him from office. He never went forward and actually went ahead in front of our state senate because he knew he filed all these lawsuits. Honestly, I made him rich because he went on NBC every night, MSNBC every night, and he became, big bad governor, remove me from office, and that's a crowd that wants to hear that message. And so he ended up becoming kind of a cause celeb. Fast forward to 2024, he decides to run to reclaim his old seat against the state attorney that I appointed to replace him. And I'm happy to report that he was unsuccessful in that effort, and he is not back in office. So utilize the levers available to you. An energetic executive acting within the Constitution, that does not mean you don't believe in limited government. The founders put certain powers in the federal Constitution. All the state constitutions have certain powers. You should know that. You should know your leverage, and you should be willing to act to move the ball forward and to make sure that the left is not able to win the day. The other thing you have to do when you're dealing with the left is you got to be willing to lead, and you got to be willing to get ahead of where public opinion is, and you know that there's going to be blowback when you do that. I can tell you, since I've been governor, I have not taken a single poll about any individual issues at all. And my view on the polls is just not even that they're not accurate, although I can take a poll of this room. If I phrase it differently, I can probably swing the results 20 points in a different direction. So you always have that. But the polls, they give you at best a static analysis. They don't give you what would happen if you actually articulate a way forward, a vision, you execute on that, and then you produce results. Guess what happens? People will come and they'll be supportive of you. And I look back at my time, the best decisions I've made, particularly about making sure businesses were open during COVID, the schools, I forced the schools to open against the wishes of the left, all these things, they were not popular with the left, but they were not even that popular with Republicans at the time because there was a lot of hysteria going on about COVID back in 2020 in those early weeks and months. And so I looked at it, I said, look, I've been looking at this data for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks. I'm confident that this is the way. I was very lonely. There weren't very many people that were willing to say that, but you got to do it. I took immense amount of heat. People would tell me, you just got to do something. Just impose masks on people so they see you're doing something. I'm like, I don't believe in imposing masks on people. First of all, I don't think the masks work. Second of all, even if they did, who am I to muzzle you? You're an adult. You can make your own decisions about this. So I was not going to do that. I wasn't going to do those things. And it was like, I'm getting hit. They would actually send Fauci down to Florida, and he would give these interviews on like local TV, bashing, Governor DeSantis is reckless for putting kids in school so early. And you know what? And I honestly thought after like 2 weeks of kids being in school and no one was dropped, I thought, everyone's going to have kids in school, and yet they didn't do it. It was hysteria. So I was getting beat down. I didn't have a lot of air cover during those times, but I knew what I needed to do was the right thing. And if you can't do the right thing in a crisis situation where people's livelihoods are at stake, their futures are at stake, if you're not willing to stand strong then what the hell are you in office for anyways? So we did it. We held strong. Now nobody will admit that they opposed me on any of those things. The teachers' unions actually sued me saying schools needed to be closed and I was being reckless to force them open. They will not admit that they opposed having kids in school now looking back. People oppose me. Fauci, he hated restaurants. And so we not only had restaurants saved in Florida, I had all the New York restaurants. They all moved to South Florida because they could operate and they made a fortune. And so people look at that. But Fauci would always be saying how dangerous it is for all this. And it got to the point where you'd go to like Chicago and they would say outdoor dining. You can't eat indoor, but you can eat outdoor. Well, that's fine. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure that that's true from an epidemiological perspective, but fine. Like, okay, eat outside. And, if you're eating outside in Chicago in August, it's nice, and I'm sure you have a good time. Probably a little bit different story in January. So what would they do? They would build outside, they would build these like little igloos where people would go in, and I'm like, what the hell's the difference then? And they thought that they were following the science. So that's where we were on that. But we were right on that, and guess what happened? 6 months later, 9 months later, the polls shifted, and I went from somebody that they were saying was had lit himself on fire politically by doing all this stuff to being somebody that won the largest Republican victory in the history of the entire state of Florida in 2022. So you can do that. So you got to lead. The other thing is, and I'm asked because we are here at the Federalist Society about the role of the courts, particularly in beating back the left. And if you'd asked me 6 or 7 years ago, what do you want in a judge? I mean, I probably would have said, well, they got to understand the separation of powers and originalism. And I'm not saying I don't believe that still, but I think what I've realized is that's necessary but not sufficient. Because if you really want to be a good judge, especially on a court of last resort, like a state Supreme Court, I mean, even a federal court of appeals, and certainly the U.S. Supreme Court, simply having the right frame of mind is not going to be enough. You got to have courage to be able to rule properly when you're going to get a lot of blowback. Because if you're on a court, you're part of the legal profession. If you rule correctly, but not what they want in terms of their ideology, particularly on culture, law professors are going to hate you, lawyers are going to hate you, media is going to attack you. And look, a lot of people just don't like that. They want to roll into Chevy Chase Country Club and have everyone clap for them, right? And the reality is if that's something that matters to you, if you're not willing to deal with the blowback, you're not going to be able to render decisions under pressure that are really consequential. You'll trim your sails, you'll engage in interpretive gymnastics just to try to be able to dodge some of the criticism. And I remember talking with Justice Thomas one time. I went and talked with his clerks, and I said, why do judges come in one way and they drift? And he's like, something about this building, something about this. But it's true. You've got to have the courage of your convictions. You have to realize that if you are applying the law properly, if you're applying the Constitution properly, you are going to render decisions that are going to conflict sharply with a lead opinion. And you're either going to be fine doing that. I mean, I like it to where you'd be like a Justice Thomas or a Scalia and relish when you do that. Not everyone may be built quite like that, but at a minimum, you've got to be willing to stand up and take the fire that comes at you. So when people ask me, what do you look for in a judge? First thing I need is courage, because if you don't have the courage to do the right thing under difficult circumstances, then ultimately you could be a good judge, but you're not going to be a great judge. Now in Florida, when I came in, the Supreme Court of our state was captured by the left for many, many decades. In fact, the Bush versus Gore, people remember that. A lot of the criticism at a place like Yale Law School will probably be on the U.S. Supreme Court, but you have to look back. How did it get to that point? You had a renegade Florida liberal Supreme Court that was contorting the law just to try to engineer a victory for Al Gore. And how they handled that was how they would handle almost every major issue that came before them, contorting, doing somersaults, trying to do whatever they can to give a victory to the left. So I came in to office, there was 4 liberals, 3 conservatives. Fortunately, we have age limits, so when I got sworn in, 3 of the liberals got termed out, and I was able to appoint 3 conservative justices in my first month in office, and we changed the balance of the court, and 2 of them are now on the 11th Circuit. I've backfilled and I've made additional appointments, but we can say, because of those appointments, judicial activism is dead in the state of Florida. They do not have any avenue to go to our state courts to try to engineer liberal outcomes. They usually go to federal court now in Tallahassee, and yes, no matter what we do, we will lose there in that forum, but then we usually win on appeal. So that's really important. So in Florida, people say the free state of Florida, and I think the reason is because we have fought back on all the things that the left is trying to jam down people's throats. We stopped judicial activism. We abolished DEI. We've reformed universities. On and on it goes. We've stood up for the people that we represent. And so we're proud of that. We understand that there's going to be a lot of battles to come in the future. But I can tell you the result in Florida shows this. When I got elected governor, we had 300,000 more Democrats than Republicans, and we had never had more Republicans than Democrats in the history of the state. When I got in, 1-point races were the norm. You can't really rock the boat. Florida's tough, don't worry. And I threw caution to the wind. I said, no, I've been given the executive authority. I'm going to wield it. I'm going to move boldly, and I'm going to do what I believe is right. And the result was we were 300,000 in the hole in 2018. By the time I ran for election again in 22, we were 300,000 above the Democrats, and we went from winning by less than 1% to winning by 20%. But it gets even better. After that victory, we've since gone from 300,000 surplus to now having a lead of almost 1.2 million registered Republicans over red. We've never seen a change that abrupt in modern American history. But what it shows you is it is not because we did a voter registration drive. That's not why. This is organic. It's because people who were chafing under lockdowns in California, New York, Illinois, they decided to seek refuge. People who saw the indoctrination in the schools and were worried about their kids saw Florida. We were fighting that. People that saw these Soros prosecutors let the inmates run the asylum and the criminals rule the street saw we believed in law and order. People within Florida who had considered themselves independents or Democrats said, no, this is what I believe in, what they're doing. So being bold, drawing a sharp contrast with the left, and in fact defeating the left, people respond. People respond positively, and Florida is proof in the pudding that these policies that the Federalist Society has stood for, the idea of constitutional government, the idea of the conservative principles that our country was founded on. It's not always obvious how you apply those in every situation, but if that's your foundation, if that's your core, and if you lead with that and are willing to swing for the fences, you will succeed. Our policies work because the principles that we believe in are the right principles. They're the enduring principles. They're the principles that founded this country, and they are going to be the principles that save this country. Thank you all. God bless you. Am I doing a question or two? You want me to do a question? Any questions or anything, or are you good?
You can. We're going to present you with the award. Do you want to take questions now?
I can take a couple questions. We still have some time. Anybody? Yes. Yes.
Hi, Governor DeSantis. My name is Andrew Liu. I'm a TIL at Yale Law School. My question is about the conservative movement. It seems like there's this growing rift between Chamber of Commerce conservatives and national conservatives on certain cultural issues and how we should approach corporate America. It seems like you in the state of Florida have charted this virtuous mean where you've been able to both create a pro-business environments and gain the support of, the free enterprise conservatives, while also standing up for conservative cultural values. Can you just talk a little bit about how do you chart that virtuous mean?
Well, the question is how do you straddle or how do you resolve conflicts between corporate republicanism and kind of more culturally conservative republicanism? And I would just say two things. I'd say one is, the culture has veered so far out of whack that even people that didn't consider themselves really attentive to the culture have been alarmed at what they see. It's one thing to be a little bit more liberal on an issue, but when, somebody, when you have a woman that's pregnant and they refer to it as a pregnant person, and then the baby that comes out, they say the doctor is assigning the sex at birth and doing things that are just not true, people reject that. They think it's ridiculous. So some of this stuff, I think, was very easy to go against. Now, all the media supported this stuff and the elite opinion supported it, but underneath that there was really no support. And so you just have to lean in on it. I do think that there are more corporate Republicans they're just squishier overall. And it's not just on culture. They're squishier on illegal immigration because, quite frankly, the businesses want cheap labor coming across the border. Now, I reject that. I think you have to have a sovereign country. I don't think you can have people just pouring in. And quite frankly, the cheap labor keeps wages down for American workers, and it also imposes a lot of costs on taxpayers. You know, people act like, oh, well, you know, they just want to work and these businesses need it. The businesses aren't paying the costs when they show up at the emergency room. The businesses aren't paying all the costs of our education system. The businesses aren't paying costs when these folks, some of them who do get involved with the criminal system. But yet I think some of the Republicans, you know, it's really just more about kind of corporatism. And here's the thing, we have the most economic growth of any state since I've been governor. Our economy in Florida has grown 30%. We have the lowest unemployment amongst large states. I mean, I can go on and on all these great things in terms of economy, and I'm proud of that. And the way you generate growth is to be market-based. It's not command and control, but at the same time, you know, we are a state with a people that has an economy. We are not just an economy where everybody is just some widget without any inherent value. And I think there's some people that conceive of the United States as just kind of a marketplace rather than a distinct country with a distinct people. So yes, we're going to have very strong pro-free enterprise, pro-growth policies, but it is going to be within the context of we are a distinct nation, we are a distinct state of Florida, and ultimately the goal is to deliver good policy for the people that we represent. So I just think that that's where most people are. I don't know that every business in Florida has always appreciated everything I did. I can tell you, once we took on Disney, a lot of them didn't say a peep after that, and I think that's probably a pretty good thing. But the reality is I think we were just strong on this stuff. The results spoke for themselves, and so yes, some people could have criticized, but the reality was we were hitting the right notes. Yes.
Well, Governor, you mentioned that Tony Fauci came and set foot on Florida soil repeatedly during COVID. Well, fairly famously, he's been pardoned for all federal crimes, but that doesn't mean he's been pardoned for state crimes. There's something we're going to see Florida Attorney General's office take on.
So the question is, honestly, it's a good one. So you have Fauci. First of all, I don't know if you saw this Elon Musk stuff. They identified 180,000 for a commemoration of Fauci at NIH headquarters. What the hell are they commemorating about Fauci? I mean, at best you can say, you know, you have the Super Bowl of public health, a pandemic, and he totally botched it. That's the best you can say, without even getting involved in gain-of-function research and all the things that went in to that treachery. How you can venerate him, he got it, at best, you have to admit he got it wrong. When this country was looking for leadership, he was on TV. I've never seen anyone do more TV interviews. I was like, why isn't he looking at the data? And I was like, because he's always given interviews. That's why he's not looking at the data. But the issue, so Biden did a preemptive pardon of him, which is odd because, you know, if he didn't do anything wrong. So the question is what about like a state action? And I think the pardon made it more likely that states are going to look into it. Now, as governor, I don't have that investigatory ability, but our attorney general, who's got a new attorney, I appointed our old attorney general of the U.S. Senate. We got a new attorney general coming in who's great. I think he's of the mindset to look at this, to see what the jurisdictional hooks are, to see what if any, statutes may have been violated. But I do think had Biden not pardoned him, I don't think you would have seen the states really do this. I think they would have deferred to the Trump administration. The reason why this could backfire on Fauci is because even if say Biden didn't pardon him, if the Trump administration had pursued charges against Fauci in, say, D.C., you're not going to prosecute someone from the swamp if the jury is comprised of the swamp. They will acquit. They protect the swamp. So Fauci, not only would they want to protect him, all those people probably deify him. I mean, you remember people were wearing like Fauci merchandise. I mean, like it was nuts what they were doing. But that's the thing. If you look at Bethesda or you look at Washington, D.C., the jury pool is going to be such that even if you wanted to do it, I think it'd be very difficult because of their mindset. Now, you know, if you start looking at some of these other states, those jury pools going to be a lot different potentially. So I don't think we've seen the end of it. I do think that it's very possible that the new AG in Florida looks and pursues this type of investigation, but I would also anticipate some other states would also do it. So it may end up boomeranging against Fauci. Biden intended to shield him from accountability, and it may have actually sparked state-based efforts to ensure his accountability. Yes?
Hi, I'm Richard. I'm a 3-out. Governor, you've had many experiences playing baseball at Yale, serving in the Navy JAG. I was wondering what experiences were most formative in your career in public service, and if you have any advice for those, for conservatives, for law students who are interested in public service, what tips would you have?
Well, it's a good question. So, I mean, you mentioned being a baseball player at Yale, now down, in Governor of Florida. Well, one thing I can say for any of you, as you go on and you have kids and any of them are interested in baseball, Florida is better for baseball than Connecticut because we don't get snowed out half the year and we're able to play year-round. And I learned that the hard way, having grown up in Florida, coming here, and I'm like, what? There's snow on the ground, and we're trying to be playing. But I think that the lessons you learn, you take from things. And I was the baseball captain at Yale. I was in the Navy. We served in Iraq. We did all these different things. Is just leadership happens on different levels. A sports team, that's leadership. It's different than being governor. Obviously, I've got 23+ million people, but those traits that you learn, the foundations that you take with you about things like leadership, but also about examples throughout history. I mean, if you study our founders, why were they special? They studied Plutarch's lives of the noble ancient Greeks and Romans. They understood certain things and certain virtues that were important for people that were in public positions. Studying our founding fathers, I think, is a great thing to do. You learn a lot from how they perceived the world, how they perceived political power, but also what they conceived of their responsibilities as leaders and as public officials. A lot different than what you see past for what goes on now. So I think that there's a lot of variety of factors. I mean, I will tell you, when I rolled into Yale my freshman year, I born and raised in Florida. I went to public school. My parents were blue collar. I showed up to New Haven because this is what we did in Florida. I mean, I had flip-flops, jean shorts, and a t-shirt on. And I'm like, hey, I'm here. And they're like, no, that didn't go over very well. And so I realized quick, I'm kind of a fish out of water. Then you start going into some of the classes. And I don't think Yale at that time was probably close to as bad as it was now. But you saw a lot of really serious leftism. Like, for example, like when I was going, I didn't know who was a Republican or a Democrat. But like, no one would go out and trash our country. In my community, no one would go out and trash God's existence or any, and like I would see that, right? I'm in class and they say that the U.S. caused the Cold War, that America is the problem here, all this thing, attacking religion. So that really opened my eyes, and people say, oh, I don't want my kids going to some of these places because they're going to get indoctrinated. And look, I think that that's definitely a concern. For me, it boomeranged the other way. I mean, I was like, I am not doing leftism. Like, I just can't do it. And so by the time I left here, there was no way I was ever going to be on that team. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Governor DeSantis. My name is JP. I go to University of Chicago Law School. Richard brought me as a guest. I just wanted to ask you a question about Chicago because I currently live there. You see states like Illinois and Chicago in specific, which is really fighting against the Trump administration. In fact, there's a lawsuit right now trying to fight against some of the ICE orders. And I was just wondering from the opposite perspective, instead of fighting the federal government, what can states do to help against a lot of this illegal immigration? Is there anything that you can do as governor to help accelerate some of these processes? Just like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I've already done it. So so I've been doing stuff now on this for a long time. I've had people at the border when Biden was president, all this other stuff. When Haiti was having all the turmoil a year ago, people said, oh, you're going to be 100,000 Haitians show up in Florida. And I'm like, no, it's not going to happen. I put boats out. We stopped. We have people that have been working with ICE on different things for a long time. But I just signed an agreement with Florida Highway Patrol and ICE under something called 287G. So basically, it's a bunch of programs where you can be deputized and exercise power alongside or even in addition to ICE. And so the state of Florida is going to do all that. I mean, we'll be the anti-California, the anti-Illinois when it comes to interior enforcement. Now, I'm currently battling our legislature about, yes, I'm going to do it as governor with our agencies, but really every local law enforcement needs to participate. You cannot frustrate the interior enforcement. So we're looking to, I think we're going to generate something this week. I called them in, they didn't like that, so they passed a really stinker bill. It blew up in their face, and so now I think they're looking to do some good policy. But basically, if you say you have an obligation to help, we'll provide funding and grants so that you're not detracting from other things. But it can't just be that someone comes illegally and unless they commit like an axe murder, you're not going to ever enforce the law against them. That doesn't work. So I think we hopefully will be able to get this in statute where the duty on both state and local are to participate. And so I think you'll see a lot of these agreements that will be signed. It'll be a force multiplier. And the thing is yes, secure the border with a wall. Yes, go after the cartels. But ultimately, if people know as long as they get here, then there's never going to be enforcement. People are going to still be enticed to come. And so when they see that there's going to actually be interior enforcement, I think it's a huge deterrence for people to come illegally. I also think these sanctuary cities should be defunded. I think you probably need Congress to actually do that. I know they're trying to do a lot through executive action, and maybe some of it will stick. But if Congress appropriates money, it has the right to condition that money. I'm not sure the executive can just simply impose. You may be able to. I don't know. I think these are open questions. But clearly, Congress can just say, if you're not participating, you are ineligible for all these funds. And I think that they should do that. And it also brings up, just beyond immigration, you're watching like with the DOGE, and they're going into some of these agencies and they're pulling this stuff out and highlighting this stuff. Why is it taking Elon Musk to do this? Okay, Republicans have had the House control the majority of the last 15 years. Why haven't they ferreted this out? And why do they continue to pass omnibus spending bills and continuing resolutions that basically give the bureaucrats free rein? Bureaucrats, if they know that behaving badly will lead to their programs being defunded, they have an incentive to behave better. If they think it doesn't matter and the government's on autopilot and Congress is just going to continue to do these massive spending bills that nobody reads, then they have every incentive to behave badly. And so I think that's why you've seen things like this USAID go off the rails. I think that's why you're going to see a lot of corruption in FEMA and some of these other agencies, because there's no accountability. Congress has ceded its most important power, the power of the purse. Why? Largely because Republicans fear a lapse in appropriations, a government shutdown, like that's the worst thing ever. Well, okay, if you think avoiding that's the worst thing ever and you're just going to continue to write checks with no strings attached and let the bureaucrats continue what they're doing, then don't turn around and complain when the bureaucrats behave badly. You're funding them. You are providing this for them. And so I think it's been the great failure of Congress that they haven't exercised the power of the purse. You would not have a bloated administrative state like you do if Congress was serious about policing bad behavior within the bureaucracy. So if you want to bring the administrative state to heel, it's not going to be enough to just turn Elon Musk loose. You're going to need Congress to actually follow up and use the power of the purse.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So, as I watched the governor this fall at some of his roundtables where he was going around and protecting the Florida Constitution from the efforts from the corporatists and the leftists in the state, we knew that there would be no better recipient for the 2025 American Courage Award than Governor Ron DeSantis. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed. All right. And